It's so talk about a poppy song with dark lyrics. I mean, uh, thank you all for joining us today. We are really, really excited to do kind of a second part to this conversation. Hopefully y'all can still see my screen share here. But we'll go ahead and get started. But before we jump in, I just want to do a quick introduction. Hopefully, let's see, let me reshare here so that you'll see my screen. One second. All right. Yeah, okay. So hopefully you see us now. You see this, the slide here. We're really excited to have this conversation, sports marketing in the new normal. So with me, I have Morgan Shaw Parker, who is VP and CMO of AMB Sports and Entertainment, which includes the Atlanta United, Atlanta Falcons, and Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I have Melissa Proctor, who's EVP and CMO of the Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena. And I have Adam Zimmerman, who's SVP of Marketing for the Atlanta Braves and Truist Park. So thank you all so much for joining me. Super excited to have this conversation today. I think just before we jump into the conversation, just one quick slide with sponsors of AMA. Thank you all so much to the sponsors without whom we couldn't make this kind of event possible. And then lastly, hope you'll join us for the AMY Awards. I think this is, our 64th annual AMY Awards, Best and Brightest Marketing in Atlanta, happening on October 6th at Guardian Works in West Midtown. So that's the last of my housekeeping slides. I'm gonna stop the share here and hopefully, let's see. So, before we jump into the full discussion, I thought I would do a quick recap of the past conversation we had in December of 2020. And I have some questions about, how things have changed since then. I sort of divided my questions into past, present, and future. And so we'll go through those questions. If any of you watching have questions, you can put them in the Q&A function. And also, I think the chat is open as well.
Hey, so, Joe, before we jump, how about a big round of applause for Melissa and the Hawks for the amazing run in the Eastern Conference?
Thank you.
I mean that was so much fun.
It was really fun.
Oh my God!
Since you sat behind me just about every game.
I maybe that was that, Melissa. We're not together, but I mean, it was electric. It was fun. Wow, what a moment for the city and magical. So yes.
Amen.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Where we were the last time we spoke to right now, like that was
a little bit different last time we talked. Yes, indeed.
Completely.
Yeah.
Well, and I know the last time we talked, none of you had fans in the stands, and what a difference it makes,
to have real people instead of cardboard people. Yes.
Right. No physical bodies in the stands.
When you're winning, it's different, as Melissa knows.
Well,
very much so.
And we've talked a lot about the fact that neither of the three of you can control the product on the field. You can't control the players. You can't control whether you win or lose. You can't control many things. But we'll talk today about what those things that you can control.
Yeah.
And so in December, we talked about how the three of you sort of had to dump your pre-COVID plans. You had big plans and you had to dump them all, throw them out the window. And you had to make some really difficult decisions about how to run your team and your marketing efforts and your business. And, it was sort of about when you get punched in the face, what do you do? How do you recover from that? And some of the things that we talked about were issues like increased creativity. How do you become more creative? Looking to quote competitors, even teams that you might compete with for inspiration and ideas, leveraging new platforms like digital. You had to lean heavily into digital and providing value to fans, to partners, to sponsors, to employees. How do you provide value when you don't have the revenue coming in the door from people coming through the turnstiles. And we also talked a lot about adding value to the community. I know Melissa and Morgan both talked about having voting at their facilities, having immunizations at the facilities, and sort of doubled down on making community impact. Braves did too, absolutely, in terms of community impact. So my first question for you all, and I'm jumping right in because I want to use the whole hour. We're jumping right into it. I'm wondering if there were any key ideas that came out of the pandemic that you think will stick in the long term, things that were new, by the last time we spoke, that you think are going to be a future state.
Absolutely. I think the first thing for us is you have to be versatile. You have to know that every plan that you create, and we've worked really hard to get better at planning. We were really good at budgeting for years, and now we're getting better as an integrated team across our businesses to plan a little bit better. But we have to know going into those plans as we start our 2022 planning literally next week, which is crazy because we haven't even been through 2021, have no idea what COVID looks like, what the future looks like. But we have to know that those plans are ever evolving and that they might get scrapped. I hope not, but you always have to have a plan B. But I think for us, the big thing was really digging deep and making sure that you understand what's in your customers' minds. But you also have to understand your associates a little bit better too. And so I think that for us is, data is one thing, but really digging in and listening to them and then asking the second question and digging deeper in terms of their motivations. You look at this marketing curve of like us, love us. Maybe they want to spend a little time with us then, and then maybe they want to spend $1 with us. You've really got to work hard on the like us, love us part before you ever think about the revenue part. And that for us is something, it sounds so simple, but we almost had to relearn that.
I would echo Morgan. You learned to be nimble, even more nimble than we normally are. And I think Melissa and Morgan would attest. Things are flying at you last second anyway, as the game approaches and so forth. But putting a priority in praising people for being nimble, and there's a pejorative where people go, "Oh, this is a fire drill." Well, you know what? A fire drill is actually a good thing. And we remember when we were kids, you're trained by your teachers that when the bell rings, you know what to do. You know to grab your buddy and walk out the door. And so you're going to have fire drills at any point in what Morgan and Melissa and I do. But boy, there were a lot of them in this period, and there still are. I mean, and candidly, we're not out of the pandemic. I mean, we have to keep an eye and again be in a position where we're adjusting as we see what the Delta variant is going to do. But I think Melissa and Morgan would echo. You're putting even more of a priority. You have a plan. You have to be nimble, and you have to just read and react and. We're trained to be proactive, but you also have to be reactive in terms of changing circumstances. So I think that's just an overall good skill, and hopefully it will not be as frenetic as what we lived through over the last few months.
Yeah, and I think, to echo that point, we always internally have this saying of playing in the gray, and the idea that, we adjust to market conditions. So I feel like fire drills are the nature of our business.
Yep.
So through the pandemic, I think the difference was it was an international fire drill that from a league perspective, we had very little control over in terms of what the mandates would come down. Day to day and how we operate our business is very different. But when it's on such a macro scale that impacts not just our team, but also all of our fans and all of our team members, it becomes a very different conversation. And so the one thing, to take it in a little bit of a different direction that I learned through the pandemic, 100% everything digital, being more versatile, but having grace with our team is probably the one thing that as a professional sports team, you don't miss games, you don't miss events. Like you're there all the time, you're on, especially, within our building. And so having so many team members that were able to reconnect on their life during that downtime, we now have a return to work strategy that has remote flexible work hours. That was almost unheard of. I'm not saying unheard of, but like in the industry, that's not what you did. But now it's a prerequisite for anyone going into any industry, because I know that if you don't want to do it, I can go somewhere else where they're like, hey, if we close down our offices, just work from home. Unfortunately, that's not how our business is set up. But we have team members in varying degrees who are able to be more flexible and, be able to spend more time with their family and being home. And operating their lives in different ways. And I think that's tremendously valuable, especially for sports as an industry, because I think it'll make for better, more well-rounded, employees and people who have more to bring to the table, who don't feel like they have to, from sun up to sundown to late game and first thing in the morning the next day. Like, it's really about having more grace with our team as we think about the future.
That's a wonderful point.
And Melissa, you always talk about bringing your whole self to work. And I know you want your team, your marketing team, particularly, not the players, another story, but your team to bring their whole selves to work. So it sounds like to me, allowing that flexibility enables that even further.
100%. Everything as small as, like, I just need to go to the doctor, not having to take a PTO day. And, and I've always led my team very much in that way. I'm like, you're grown, we respect one another. There's work to be done, but I don't care where you need to do it. Like, live your life, because life will always be more important than work for me. But I think the pandemic just kind of gave a lot of people the opportunity to see that at a macro level, where before it wasn't a thing, especially in sports. I remember when I first came to the Hawks, it was like, you don't miss games. Everyone is here all day long. And if you take time off during the season, that was unheard of. And Adam and I, through our playoff run, had a lot of conversations. I had a 10-day trip to Dubai playing with my daughter, like, from February, based on having family overseas. And as the time got closer, I was like, I can't take this trip. What am I, like, we are going to the Eastern Conference. Like, there's no possible way. And Adam was like, take the trip. And speaking to my manager, like, and even with my team, having an amazing team of leaders who are all top of the game, in terms of what they do. And I took the trip. I worked the entire time. But I'm grateful that I had the flexibility to be able to do that. And I do think that the pandemic made that more of a reality that wasn't as unheard of as it was before.
That's a great point, Melissa. The other thing too is, there's a place in our work for, my only concern is, right, when an idea gets surfaced and people, and there's a place for my only concern is. But I think this climate gives us the opportunity to really let it rip with, wouldn't it be cool if, right? We rewarded unbridled creativity because we didn't know. Okay, let's go. Let's get the good ideas flowing. And I think, the opportunity to be creative, to create new capabilities on the fly, gave us the opportunity to create something new. And so that's not going back in the box. I think that we had to, I think Morgan and Melissa would attest, good ideas, we have to have them. They need to come from everywhere. We've got to shore things up. We've got to connect with our fans. We've got to protect revenue because sponsors are not able to activate in our buildings, so keep the ideas flying and reward people for bringing them forward.
I would add to that I agree with everything that Melissa and Adam said. I would also add that we were forced to look really hard at validating the fact that it's okay to talk about mental health too, externally, internally, but it also forced us to really dig a little deeper with our customers too. All of that affects how they're going to spend their time, how they're going to spend their money. But then you look internally towards your associates, and it was important to us to take a step back and, all leading towards what Melissa said in that work-life balance. In sports, we always joke that there is no work-life balance. Work and life are the same thing, partly because we love what we do, but there's a not okay piece to that too. It's almost in jest. We make fun of the fact that we work really, really long hours, but when you really boil it down, I love even the fact that in the Olympics right now, mental health is okay to talk about. You've got Simone Biles out there, at the forefront of that, which is really cool.
I love it. Well, Adam, you talked a little bit about creativity. One of the things we discussed in December, I'm going to do probably five, 6 more minutes about the past, and then we'll move on to the present. But one of the things we talked about was getting inspiration from, like we mentioned, live music. Morgan, you mentioned the grocery business, food delivery, retail, gaming, video gaming, all of these other industries. So I'm curious if there was a specific inspiration that you took and incorporated into your business that you found from another industry or a competitor or some other source.
Yeah, I'll tell you that I'm all in on gaming. And I did not grow up a gamer. Okay, I grew up in coastal Florida. I was outside all the time. I did not understand and connect with gaming. And the education that I've had on it, and being able to spend time with Epic Games, makers of Fortnite, and understanding Roblox, and just all of the implications for what we do in sports business has been just stunning. And we learned a lot, whether it's Travis Scott performing in Fortnite and in some of those activations. And so we've been inspired. In the sidebar, I know we'll talk about digital transformation, that we're about digital twins. And in what I mean by that is everything that we have in bricks and mortar and flesh and blood, we're thinking about digitizing. And so, in a few weeks, we're gonna show the world Digital Truist Park, and really see what that unlocks for us in terms of monetization and next generation fan experience. But my takeaway is, how can we learn not just from Fortnite and Roblox, but the underpinnings of Unreal Engine and what that enables us to do in terms of 3D, right? We've been in 2D, we've been in mobile devices, but the next iteration of the web will be 3D, will be the metaverse. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't start to think about aspects of our business in that context.
I love it. So we talked about the need to show value, especially when you got sponsors that have expectations and things like that. So I'm curious, what were some of the ways that you showed value to fans, to employees, to sponsors, to players, and what was the response to the value that you were showing?
Well, I can say from a Hawks perspective, we focused on community, and it's showing value that we care about the city in which we serve, not necessarily we're just here to put butts in seats and, win games. And so I think the response to the work that was done throughout the pandemic and continues, the MLK jerseys, donating all of our profits to the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative of Atlanta, partnering with RCIE, it is, and we didn't do it for that reason to show value. We did it because it was the right thing to do. But I think what's come back around is it was probably some of the most impactful work we've ever done as an organization, and the fact that it's in our DNA and it's just what we continue to do on a day-to-day basis. Even most recently, in partnership with State Farm, a Good Neighbor Club unveil we did in College Park that had, a Hawks Talent gaming club. We had a whole NBA 2K opportunity for kids to be able to come in and do gaming while, they may be doing homework after school, and doing those things on a regular basis. It was amazing sitting there hearing, the kids talk and the city officials. And it was like, wow, the Atlanta Hawks have been here. You've been here. Mm-hmm. And I think the response is so much more genuine and authentic and heartfelt, because it's not we're only doing this right now because we want you to come back, and obviously to Morgan's point, winning helps a ton. So to do all of that great work and then have an amazing playoff run, it puts you in a very different position where now we just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the communities we serve.
That consistency is so important. But one of the things that we looked at, in addition to community, and Melissa's team did amazing things throughout that entire run, and that consistency is important. One of the things we had to look at was our season ticket member benefits. We had to really dissect, why is this something that people may or may not want to invest in? You almost have to put your BS glasses on and then put BS glasses over that, forgive the French. But you really have to boil it down to, how is this simple to understand and why should they care? Mm-hmm. And we actually ended up investing into our benefits and adding even more, not just to drive the revenue, but to Melissa's point, because it was the right thing to do. And honestly, at the end of the day, it was as simple as listening to our fans and saying, what would provide them value? Now, coming out of COVID and fans wanting to be back, our sales are soaring right now. We've also got wind at our backs with a new head coach, a brand new team, second year of a new brand identity. But really simple, easy to understand benefits with extra added value was something that was almost a game changer for us.
Mm-hmm. I would echo Morgan. I think it reminded us as an industry that perhaps maybe we've taken our fans for granted a little bit in some contexts, and we can always be better, right? How can we constantly be saying, you're passionate about us? Remember, the derivative, I know we're going to talk about fan experience, but fan is a derivative of fanatics. People have just this irrational love for the Atlanta Hawks or the Falcons or the Braves or Wake Forest. And how do we continue to thank them for that, for their love of us? I mean, other brands are jealous of us because we have built-in brand loyalty. People tell us, don't they, ladies, on any given day, how they feel about what we're doing, how we're doing. And so, I echo Morgan that it really made sure that we redoubled our efforts in telling our fans, whether they're season ticket holders or single game, or you matter. We appreciate you. Thank you. And I think that was a really good reminder that we'll continue to take forward into the future.
Yeah, and really one other quick thing on that, because 100% agree on season ticket members. And I think the unique thing for our organization and the way that, as I mentioned, State Farm partnership, we've had a lot of corporate partners come on board because they found value in partnering with us in the work we're doing within the community. Mm-hmm. So while we talk about that work being, what we do as an organization and our DNA, it also is incredibly valuable from a corporate partnership perspective in terms of how the work that we're doing can impact and allow other partners to be connected to the community in authentic and genuine ways that really amplify both their business and ours, as well as the community. So in my mind, it's a win across the board.
And I think, reminding ourselves that we are community assets. And again, I applaud Melissa and Tony Rensler for what they've done on the voting front, Morgan, what you and Arthur and others have done in terms of immunization. We did immunizations, food scarcity, but reminding ourselves that we have a purpose, we have a role, we have a reason, that we are community assets. And I think that was an extremely important takeaway for us.
To build on that point, Melissa, earlier, is it's interesting to think about now what we're considering using our stadium for. We hosted a few things that wouldn't have normally been on the table had we not been in a situation where we needed to consider other sources of revenue. We hosted a wacky event with Triller earlier this year. And I have to say, I have two little boys, so I wasn't in that space in terms of what Triller is and, fighting mixed with music, mixed with performance. And it was so weird for us. But even though I wasn't the target market, it was really interesting to do an event for no fans, for all pay-per-view. There were 100 people in the building, but the way they personalized their message, granted, again, I'm not the consumer, but I was fascinated at the way they were doing things, because it really made us rethink, maybe how do we grant access in a different way? What are we using our building for? How are we bringing more people in for different types of events and different types of ways to think about bringing communities together?
I love it. Well, a couple of you talked about, by the way, I want to point out that 50% of the people in this conversation are Wake Forest graduates. So
let's tell the listeners.
Right.
Go Deeks.
Go Deeks. So, you all talked a little bit about digital transformation, and there's kind of an ongoing joke about COVID, which is, what forced digital transformation? Was it the CEO? Was it the CFO? Was it the CTO? No, it was COVID. So I'm curious, you all were very actively involved across all the digital channels pre-COVID, but I'm wondering if there's anything that you did new that accelerated because of COVID particularly.
Yeah, I think, you've got to remember that the business model was inexorably paused. Right. And for everybody, our core business model, which has been in place for 100 years, that if I can't sell Morgan a ticket and she doesn't come to my building and I'm able to get per cap, right? That is the lion's share of how we make money in professional sports. When you throw in, obviously, merchandising and our media rights and sponsorships, but all of those things were paused. And for a moment in time, we're like, is that coming back? Where can we find new revenue? What should we be doing? So I think it forced us, we were already there because you have to be there, but to really be inspired and say, what would a full-on digital transformation look like? And is this the moment in time, like a Nike, like other companies that have said, you know what, we are all in on being a platform business. We are going to just go headlong into digital, and we're going to look at what would it be if our entire going to business strategy wasn't about selling shoes in a mall, but it was adopting a digital transformation mindset. And I think that is still happening to us, where yes, we're happy to go back to the traditional business model, but we'd be remiss if we did not think about the implications of digitizing everything that we do.
Yeah,
go ahead, Melissa.
No, go ahead, Mary.
We talk a lot about digital monetization, and we've been working on it for years. And COVID really forced us to put a stake in the ground and say, hey, we're going to do things differently. And we actually reinvested in digital monetization in a much bigger way, because as many listeners on this call, they know to be true, CMOs, chief revenue officers, CEOs, they have to invest their money differently. They want value. And so how does a sports team provide that feel-good content where they know the fans are going to engage, but also there's a model where a sponsor can come on board and it doesn't feel like sales, it doesn't feel like you're selling something. People don't want to be quote unquote marketed to. And so digital monetization becomes something really different, and especially when the content landscape becomes even more splintered. And I truly believe, I said this at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'll say it again, I feel like the pandemic has almost fast forwarded us in so many ways, 5 to 10 years in terms of where we need to be thinking, whether that's OTT, in gaming, what platforms are more important, who's engaging where. And I think that we're in this time period where it is unclear unless you marry the data with the conversations and digging deep to figure out where are people spending their time.
Yeah, and I think the interesting insight, and Melissa and the NBA are global, but there are millions of people who follow the Falcons, the Braves, the Hawks, on various platforms that will never walk into our gates. And so if you think about that audience of people who love your brand, and again, to get back to my point about the alternate business model, we've been trained over generations of sports business, sell tickets, get people in, drive per cap. But what happens if you start to look at the scale of people who connect with your brand every day? There are more people right now that are locked into the Atlanta Braves today than will come through my turnstiles in a year. And so as we start to think about that, like a lot of the European soccer clubs have thought about it, that they're like, okay, what if I could get $1 a day out of these millions of fans who watch us? I think that can be transformative for us.
Yeah, and I'll say for the Hawks, I remember when I initially came to the organization about 7 years ago, we would look at social media as added value from a partner perspective.
Right.
And, I came in and brought an agency that I had worked with and, really came up with a digital monetization model to say, hey, look, all of these things have value. How do we use these platforms? How do we look at them differently? And so fast forward to the pandemic, when everything else shut down, the two areas of our business that never stopped was digital and social and content development and retail. Mm-hmm. So we were up over 136% in sales from an e-com perspective, and our business grew drastically. And this was before we hit playoffs or even had the success that we had. And so obviously that just took it to another level. And so we had to very quickly internally say, how do we effectively put dollars towards this in order to enhance the growth? But then also knowing from a content perspective, we were able to be one of the top teams in growth on Instagram across the NBA because we were doing really interesting partnerships with local influencers, collab cribs, doing things that other industries were doing, but sports wasn't necessarily doing at that rate because we saw the opportunity. We were here in Atlanta and we knew from a corporate partnership standpoint, in terms of a make good, that was the only place. So digital had to go into a different direction. And I do think we've invested more in the team and the infrastructure, things that we needed in order to continue that level of growth and output. But it's a really big deal. And honestly, from an organizational standpoint, it's a bit of a shift because you also have to bring a lot of people on board with you. And it takes a lot of time, effort, and energy to do that effectively. So whether it's looking across content calendars, knowing that gone are the days that you can post one thing across every platform and run it in Arena and it was checking a box, like there's a lot more nuance, a lot more customization and personalization as it relates to our season ticket members, to our fans. And so, I think the learnings, to Morgan's point, we've accelerated quickly, but it continues to grow. And I remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, we were talking about QR codes. And I'm like, no one uses these things. Why would we put a QR code on anything? And something that was so almost archaic and mundane in certain ways has come back with a vengeance, mainly through the food industry. And now they're on TV, wherever you are. I spoke on a panel yesterday. It was like, yes, we have your QR code for your questions. Like, it's amazing how not just looking at the new things, but also how old things become new or used in different ways based on needing to innovate quickly.
I hope I'm not the only one who's been confused at a restaurant lately because they didn't bring you a menu and they point to the QR code on the table that you have to scan to get.
That would be a transformative thing. It blew my mind. I sat there for probably 15 minutes.
But it's amazing how like our patterns are changing so drastically, and it was overnight. Like, you think about adoption for QR codes, and for how long, obviously they've been around, like, oh yeah, we use them, we don't really use them, they're there, to overnight, it's no matter where you are, if you're going to a restaurant, I got to find my phone, I don't know how to do it, I got to download an app, like, it's a thing.
It is, and I tell you what, I'll echo Melissa. I mean, for us, engagement through our social platforms, we know that an engaged fan spends 6 times more money than an unengaged fan. Well, that's a pretty good KPI for us. And so we say, okay, well, how do we drive engagement? Which is for us, it ultimately gets to email. I ultimately understand that this is Melissa Proctor who's interacting with a piece of Braves content, and then we're going to put that into data sets. And I know we'll talk about data here in a second, but that you have to be creating compelling content, which doesn't just drive the vanity metrics. I mean, that's important too, but what you really are, your KPI, in my estimation, you're looking for is engagement, because engagement leads to somebody cared enough about your content to comment on it or send it or do something which gives you data forensics, which enable us to retarget you. And I think that it continues to evolve. And I tell people when I go speak to students, if you have an aptitude for data and analytics and predictive, prescriptive analytics skill set, you're really marketable right now. I mean, I think Morgan and Melissa would echo. I'm stunned at the caliber of people that we attract now in sports business, that those jobs were unthinkable even 18 months ago.
Mm-hmm. I agree, Adam. And we talk a lot. First of all, I have a rock star team that works in this area. We talk a lot about the fact that content is the product, whereas only a few years ago, it was the football team that was the product. That's it. That's the product. Now, if you look at content as the product in all of the forms and facets that it comes in, whether that's gaming, whether that's social, whether that's digital, whether that's through your app, it becomes a really different thing. And so to your point about data, we talk about the fact that the data is important, but you have to have someone in human form that is able to glean insights from that data and then apply those insights very specifically to what are you going to do in the market? What type of content do you need to create? Sometimes those are two different things, but if you don't have two different people that you can hire, how do you start to marry and merge those things? And so that's been a real sweet spot for us and a place that we're growing in the data and analytics space, but it all stems from content as the product, but we also have the grassroots piece of it and the experiential piece of it, but they have to complement each other, but two different things.
You brought up something that actually is a great segue, Morgan. So we're moving from the past into the present, and then we'll move to the future. It's going to be amazing. You're going to help us see the future. But you talked about insights. So where do you gather insights from fans, from players, from staff, from sponsors? And then how do you take those insights and leverage them for marketing to create better experiences? So yeah. Curious where you go to find the insights.
Yeah, I think that's where we're at right now. I mean, I echo Morgan, that data as the backbone for modern day marketing. And we'll talk about how that syncs up to the creative idea, but serving the needs of fans is table stakes, right? We should be doing that. And the internet has taught us over the last 30 years that we live in a customer-centric universe, and understanding and being to enable and anticipate the needs of your consumers are where we should be. But, where things get really interesting is, Steve Jobs didn't tell me I needed an iPhone until he told me, right? And Henry Ford said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have told me faster horses. So where do you get that spark? Where do you get that innovation? And I believe that data, and people, to Morgan's point, who can study data and be able to extract a nugget that you didn't see that then can become actionable is something that we have all committed to and will continue to do for the next several years.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving just for the sake of time, but I know that you all have been really focused on fan experience and the changing fan experience. It's not just about go to the stadium, get the hot dog, watch the team. There's a lot more to it. And so, especially as fans that can't attend in person, how do you create a great fan experience, not just in stadium, but also outside of stadium?
Well, I'm going to let Melissa take that one because Melissa's created an amazing fan experience that we've just watched blossom in the last several months.
And, it's a great question, and it's difficult, especially as we were navigating the pandemic, because we probably had some of our lowest fan experience scores for people coming in the building when we were limited in what we were able to do per COVID restrictions and guidelines, and not being able to tangibly be there to hand things to people. And, so much of it is having guest services come and be able to take your picture, and all those touch points that we really took for granted completely changed the way we had to think about it. And so being able to provide digital and virtual opportunities for fans to be able to, see live players practicing and shoot around pre-game, creating more of those opportunities where before we weren't as worried about it. It was a new asset and something that we were able to possibly monetize as well. But doing more of that became an opportunity. We've always felt like taking our fan experience of what we create in the building outside into the community was a really big piece. Mm-hmm. So some folks don't have a street team or fan experience team. We've always have. And so going to local parades and festivals with that group was imperative. And we weren't able to do that either. And so that's where I really think content had to come in a very different way. And we tried all types of things. So whether it was Harry the Hawk reading bedtime stories to kids, and he doesn't speak, so it was very colorful, in creating that content and putting it out on the Hawks at Home platform to say, how do we engage in new ways? And it fell flat. And I'm like, I understand it. But having the ability and audacity to try new things was really helpful. And from that, we learned a ton. And we learned what worked and what didn't work. And so now as we go forward to next season, from an in-game perspective, we also tried a lot of different things. When you are limited in certain ways, it really allows your creativity to flourish in other ways. And so go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I was going to say too, Melissa, it's funny because fan experience, I think, has become a catcher's catch can over the last couple of years. I mean, it means a whole lot of things to different people. Yeah. And it can mean everything from, how quickly do I get through a turnstile to how long do I stand in a concession line, to my traffic patterns, to a lot of things which are incredibly important from an operational and a UX perspective, right? My app that I have. But for me, as we go back, and Melissa hit on a lot of these things, the fan experience at the root is, again, if you dissect that word, fanatics, the irrationality that people have for a sports team. That's what keeps us all in business, the industry. And experience, which really, when you think about the word experience, in my mind, is the nexus of memory and emotion. It's the fun that Melissa and I had, sitting there yucking it up. I remember that, that was a great memory that I had. And so I think we sometimes allow some other things which are important, but I think should be categorized differently, because at the end of the day, it's about memory and emotion, some of which you can enable for people, breaking down the barriers between player and fan and venue and fan, some of which people inextricably link. Oh, I met my spouse at a Falcons game. Oh, my last Hawks game with my granddad was at Milwaukee. Those are the things that people carry around with them that really imbue fan experience, in my estimation.
And I totally agree. And I think to build on that, the other element, and I know you mentioned things that are happening outside of the building, but inside the building, we really look at that as home court advantage first, which is a little bit of a different perspective, because while it is very much about the fan, it's how does that fan interact to ensure that the team has the support that they need in order to get that fanatic experience and the wins and everything else going. And so internally, that's one of our goals as an organization. How do we maintain home court advantage? And it can take so many different forms. And as an example, we had a team of folks internally called the flight crew who were great at high five and getting everyone excited, playing music, and during the pandemic, we couldn't do that. And so our guest services team and all of the ushers and staff who are helping folks, they kind of took on that role. And if you've seen the video on social and people kind of going down the Soul Train line, coming off the escalator, it became a completely different thing, where in the past, people saw those roles as security, making sure that you sat in the right seat. Now it's around, how do you really help engage fans so they have a more memorable experience that ultimately helps to drive home court advantage. And so by being open and allowing us to play in the gray and seeing like, hey, this role isn't definitive. There are no sacred cows. Like everyone can help engage fans. It doesn't have to be that you're security and you're this. It has completely transformed how people receive the experience of coming into the building for a game.
Amen to that. And Melissa, I can speak as a fan coming into your building during the playoffs. That was one of the highlights that I took away, is you're seeing up there on the boards and in social media, these, you know, folks that are security guards and folks that are in your stands that are your stadium staff out there being a part of the energy of the game, which is crazy. And something seemingly so simple that then becomes an aha moment. And just to double down on that is, you know, it really is allowing the fans and your associates, no matter who they are, get into that conversation with you. We talk a lot about the fact that there's no template for this. No. And sports has been done a certain way. There are certain things that are just part of the experience, but to innovate in a way that really makes a difference, that's hard to come up with an insight like that.
Yep.
But that was gold. It is absolutely gold. And we've actually done something similar where we've had our fans really help us create a super fan section. We've got a lot of fans that they're not late arriving. They want to cheer. They want to stand the whole game. They have that mentality. So we've literally taken an entire section, 134, and allowed them to help us build what does that experience look like. And we've readjusted our ticket prices. It's a $900 ticket. There's no PSL. It's a general admission section where they're actually going to be kind of the center of energy. And they're helping us build that every step of the way, which has been really cool. So it'd be called the Dirty Bird Nest. That'll be new this year. So there's some really tangible things that are coming out of listening in a different way.
Okay, I love this. I'm going to bring up a different topic altogether, which is that all three of you have responsibility not only for marketing your teams, but you also have venue responsibility. So Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Truist Park, State Farm Arena, and you think about even the Battery, you know, the Battery in Atlanta as a property, right? So I'm curious how commercial real estate has become important in the sports marketing world. Like, I know you also all host events that are non-sporting events in your venues, but you also are driving experience and revenue around, you know, the building and the facilities and all of the other things like that. So I'm just curious to hear about commercial real estate's impact on your jobs as sports marketers.
I'll start off on that one. And so, you know, I think, and Melissa can speak to this too, because they have a project in development and you know, commercial real estate as an asset class, you know, again, to come back to the business model, all of our responsibilities at the end of the day is ownership is looking at growing value. Arthur Blank, Tony Rensler, you know, our group, you know, how is this property becoming more valuable? So if you look at the traditional business model, as we've talked about, all things building, tickets and per cap and so forth, merchandise, sponsorship, media rights, most of those things are multi-year deals. And for C-level people, for ownership groups, they go, okay, so we're going to get a little uptick here. We're going to get a little uptick there. That's great. Fantastic. What's new? And so what you're seeing emerging is, you know, what we have here and a lot of other teams and leagues are looking at, which is an owned and operated commercial real estate asset that becomes another part of that business model. And then, you know, for us, it lives and breathes 365 days a year. So we have 81 games where we're activating out here. We have concerts, we have commercial real estate, we have corporate headquarters. But, you know, I care passionately about what happens the other 270 odd days a year in terms of, I want people to come out here and go to the restaurants and go to the shows and come watch Wake Forest basketball. So, you know, the fact that we can stay connected to our fan base, literally in a physical way, 365 days is phenomenal. But the insight there is the addition to the business model of commercial real estate.
Yeah, and I'll say, I mean, you guys did a phenomenal job with the Battery, you know, and building up Truist Park collaboratively. And I know that was definitely an example as, you know, we looked at the Gulch and our ownership team and investment has built up Centennial Yards, which while it's in its beginning stages, you know, we're having meetings now just talking about what that's going to evolve and develop into, which is a huge plot of land in the middle of downtown Atlanta, which has been rail yard and, parking lot that will soon become a full city. And it's exciting to me because I think it really has the opportunity to connect areas that were really disparate by nothing because there was just no streets or clarity in terms of transportation. But I think as an organization, to your point, tremendous upside from a business perspective. But for us, from a fan engagement, I love that idea of 365. I mean, obviously our arena is very different in terms of a stadium or park, just because we host live events on a regular basis. So in addition to that, whether it's, television shows being shot there, being used as a set for all of the film and production happening in Atlanta, like those things are happening on a regular basis. And so, working with our head of booking and all the promoters that are coming in, we have marketing leads on our team, and that's 100% of their job. And it's how do we help sell those shows, and how do we attach, our branding to it in ways that helps to amplify both the show and the building and brand. And so it's a really nuanced challenge, but I'm excited for the future when we will have a battery and be able to engage fans and have watch parties right outside the building. I mean, I got so many calls during that, that Bucs series. People are like, do you see what they're doing there with all those fans outside? And I'm like, it's crazy. And that's awesome. We've never necessarily had the space built out in that way, just based on where our arena is and how it's situated. So I'm excited for that future, but I also know that in the building up to it, there's a ton of work that has to get done. And I think from a business development standpoint, it also creates a lot of new opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise without that commercial real estate.
I 100% agree. Something that we talk a lot about here is the kind of the sharp point for us is really the fact that 98% of Arthur Blank's wealth goes back into the community. But first you have to figure out, what is this live, work, play situation from a consumer point of view? What does that look like? And how do you invest in that in the right way? So to Adam's point, you're not just growing incrementally, but you're really providing new value, different value to your fans, to these different industries, where you're providing almost an intersection point to what Melissa referenced, an intersection point physically that allows them to come in and use your facilities, as well as have your team or your organization be a catalyst to bring those folks together in a different way. So, I couldn't agree more. It is one of the areas that I'm most excited about. We're doing the same thing, just in different ways, and in a lot of ways in partnership with the Hawks, since we're right next door to each other. But it's pretty cool to see this entire area transform when you look at retail, when you look at hotels, when you look at even the Home Depot backyard and what that's become as a community space, and how we grow that, and what does that look like in 3 to 5 years. It's a pretty special thing to be able to do. It's not just focusing on the team, even though that's really, really important.
And that must be stimulating for you three, particularly as marketers, to have this whole nother set of challenges, and it's literally a new playground for you and beyond just the team.
Yeah. Well, and remember though, the team is the product. We build everything around that, and what people come for is to see the Falcons play, to see the Hawks play, to see the Braves play. And, I know, Joe, we'll talk a little bit about the athletes themselves, but that they remain the core product.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to move on to a different topic. So back when we spoke in December, the social justice movement seemed to be a headline. We saw it across the headlines, and there was a lot of momentum. So I'm curious what your teams have done, what you've done as marketers for your teams to keep that momentum going. I know you all have some pretty good examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, and I can say for the Hawks, like I said, this past season with our MLK jersey, that uniform and concept came up with 3 years prior to anything, ever happening before the events of last summer. And so for us, it's a continuation, the work we're doing at the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative of Atlanta, the work we're doing with the Russell Center. As an organization, we really dug in deep on economic empowerment for people of color as a way to combat a lot of that social injustice. And so obviously there's more than one way to do that, by bringing on more, DEI resources internally. And like I said, it's in the DNA of a lot of the work that we've done, but it's an ongoing conversation, whether it's from a content perspective, being able to highlight and amplify some of those local businesses that are doing great work, it's ongoing. And it's interesting to see how leagues are attacking it versus different teams. And even when I speak to my peers at other organizations, when they were in the bubble, it was a very different conversation. And then coming into last season, it evolved. And some of it is, just based on their market. But I think it's really important being here in Atlanta, especially in a city that is, has a huge African-American population. It's imperative that we set the example and continue that work moving forward.
Talk a lot about the fact that there is no off season in democracy. And when you had the pandemic on top of political unrest, on top of social unrest, it was really a time where everybody was on board and paying attention. What we realized together with our foundation is that we actually have, 3.5 years where we have a time period where we need to teach people that they need to be involved in democracy at the youngest stage. So 11th and 12th graders, we're focusing on some programming there where we're actually teaching a class in the Atlanta Public Schools and with a few other organizations, and Rock the Vote being a big part of that as well. And so I'm really proud of our foundation, proud of our organization for leaning in that way. There's a lot of other, I won't say initiatives because I think initiatives have a short time span. It really is what Melissa said, it's in our DNA, but it's really digging into how do you make positive, tangible, deep impacts to be able to sustain that. So it's not just something that comes up every 4 years.
That's right. I would echo that. Deepening ties to the entire community is a 365-day-a-year, 24-hour proposition. We were reminded just recently when we celebrated the life and legacy of Henry Aaron, who's been with the organization since 1954, who was on a forefront of many of these issues and challenges, and being able to celebrate him and keep his vision going through a fellowship program and a new fund that's been established. That's been a living example for us in our organization, the life and legacy of Henry Aaron.
Love it. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the future. We have about 6 minutes left. If you had a magic wand, what would you change about your industry? What's the one thing that you could fix instantly?
More women in leadership. That's a whole nother session.
Yeah.
I totally echo that.
Sorry.
In ownership and leadership, because I think that also makes a big difference.
Quick plug for Melissa Proctor's book, From Ball Girl to CMO. A great example of, she's providing a roadmap for how you can follow her path. So if you're interested in leadership or ownership in a sports team, follow her roadmap.
I'm going to throw in for the athletes. I think all of us understand and appreciate it is, athletes get a lot of grief. Oh, they make too much money, this, that, and the other. We get to see it, Morgan, Melissa, and I, how hard they work. And to Morgan's point earlier, the mental stress that gets put on and the responsibilities that they have on and off the field, the pressure. And so, we have the opportunity, all of us, to work with our athletes as people, one-on-one. And so I really wish that a lot of those misperceptions about athletes would go away. Trae Young is only one of 30 people in the world that can do what he does, right? When you start to think about it that way, Freddie Freeman's one of only 30 people in the world that can do what he does. Matt Ryan, one of only 32. It's a very finite universe of people who are absolutely expert at their craft, and they work on it each and every day. And then the responsibilities that are placed on them, and especially in the days of social media, it's really enormous. So my magic wand, Joe, would be let's be kinder to our athletes, and let's understand sort of what they go through each and every day.
Great point.
Absolutely. I would also, that you led me to kind of a question that I've had, which is there's, I think, a greater expectation of connectedness to those athletes from a standpoint of, because of social media and such. So how do you facilitate connections, authentic connections between the locker room and the fan?
Well, I can say from a Hawks perspective, a lot of that has to do with the locker room and the operations on the sports side, because I've, worked at multiple teams through different leadership, and you have some that are like absolutely none. we are private. This is our home. This is our space. And so when we're out on the court, that's the fans' time. But, you know, that's not where we are. We were very fortunate in our last playoff run. When Coach McMillan came on board, he was very open to having cameras in the locker room. And and you'll see it in the difference in our content, seeing the guys walking in, the conversations they're having. And it definitely provides that POV that you feel like you're behind the curtain. And I know even as a fan personally, it gets me so excited. I'm like, thank you for giving us the opportunity to do that, because it's a gift. It's not necessarily expected. From the other perspective, I really believe that players are so much more in control of that access now than ever before, because while the team can do so much, when the locker room, the players themselves have the biggest megaphone, you know, like Trae Young's social following. He can share what he had for breakfast, what he's doing. There's no corporate sponsors attached. You know, he can play whatever music he wants. I have so many other limitations.
Brought to you by Wheaties.
Whichever. I have a lot more limitations on me as a team. And so I really think that if I was an athlete, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity and potential revenue that they can generate just from really building out their social platforms and telling their own stories. Okay. And we'll see that. We can control so much of it, and we do the very best job that we can in ensuring that fans feel like they're a part of the team. But as individuals, I mean, those guys, they have a whole new level of opportunity, in my opinion.
Agreed. You know, 3 things to punctuate what Melissa said. First, the NBA has led on being a player-centric league. And so I think that is inspiration for the rest of us. You have to partner with your players and in a way that they're comfortable, a way that you're signing up for who they are as people. And I think that getting that level of trust is really, really important, and work hard on it. We work hard on that each and every day, getting to know what makes our players tick so we can work with them and we can co-create with them. Also, we're blessed that these players are digital natives. It's not like back in the day where you had to really work to get somebody to, hey, we need you to sign autographs for 2 hours. Oh, man, I'm not doing that. No, dude, I just need you to hop on. I need you to take over for me. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. And interact with fans. And now somebody gets a digital autograph as opposed to and so I think to Melissa's point, it helps us tremendously. You know, a 150-year-old franchise, the Atlanta Braves, works hard to be cool. My 27-year-old shortstop, Dansby Swanson, and my 24-year-old, Ronald Acuna, they are cool. So the more we get to know them, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, and then how we as a team can leverage those players through their platforms in those ways. Because I think, to your point, being able to cast them in ways that they want to be casted is a very different experience as opposed to, hey, we do have 3 hours worth of stuff for you to sign. They don't want to do that.
They love that. They love that.
Yeah, creating content behind the scenes. Oh man, it's a whole other ballgame.
Curating playlists, all that stuff.
Morgan, you get the last word.
You know, what I was going to say is that it all comes down to building trust. You know, building trust with our athletes, building trust with our fans, building trust with our community. And, you know, I just have to say thanks to Melissa and Adam, because I call them both on a regular basis to say, does this seem weird, or what are you doing about this? And I love the collaboration, even though technically we're competitors, but this is how we get our job done. And at the end of the day, I don't look at it like that. And I'm truly grateful for the camaraderie and the ability to do this, not just on a panel, but in everyday life.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to, first of all, thank the 3 of you, because it is clear to me from our conversations, again, how much respect and trust you have with each other, the 3 of you, but also I think you all 3 really understand the floating tide of the Atlanta sports community and how you can all contribute to making Atlantans truly invested in these teams. And by the way, that's the power of marketing, right? To me, the power of marketing is to be able to allow fans to become, to your point, Adam, fandom is short for fanatic. And I think we're, as Atlantans, fanatical about our teams, but that is in large part due to the work that you all have done to make those teams really accessible and create great fan experiences so that they, while they're investing in a seat or they're investing in merchandise, you're investing in them by delivering really great experiences. So I appreciate the time that we've spent today. I think we're going to have to do part 3 in 6 months or whatever, because I had 20 more questions, and we had questions from the audience that we didn't even get to. So thank you all again. This has been an amazing conversation.
And Joe, thank you for leading. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for joining.
Yep. And go Deeks.
Go Deeks.